Do not skip this video. What you are about to listen to happened in a real courtroom and saved a man who was on a death sentence. The judge had just delivered a death sentence to a man when suddenly a dog walked into the courtroom with evidence that changed everything. He knew no one believed him. Not the prosecutor, not the jury, not even the man who had shared a cell with him these past few weeks. Still, he held on to hope, not for justice or truth, but for one thing, that Bear would understand. Before we move on with today's story, please let us know where you're listening from. "Stand, Mark Levin," said Judge. The courtroom froze. The low hum of the air conditioner, the cough of an old reporter in the back, the scratching of a pen on paper, all of it sounded louder than the judge's voice. Mark stood slowly, as if sensing this would be the last time he'd ever be asked to rise, not to be freed, but to be taken away forever. "The court finds you guilty of the rape and murder of Claire Benton. Sentence? Death." No cries, no gasps, just a click of someone's pen. The verdict had been decided long before. Mark didn't flinch. His eyes wandered. Somewhere in the hallway behind a concrete wall, an old German shepherd named Bear waited for him. Calm in his crate, as always, like he understood everything at a glance. Claire had been special. Maybe the only woman who could quiet him, calm him. They met after he was dismissed from the police force, and in a few short months she became part of his life as if she'd always been there. And then she was found dead. Her apartment covered in blood, no forced entry, signs of struggle. His fingerprints on a wine bottle, his boot prints in the blood, his DNA on her body. Everything pointed to him. "They framed me," he had said. They didn't care. "Do you have any final words?" the judge asked. Mark didn't answer right away. He looked at the prosecutor, the jurors, the empty bench where Claire's mother used to sit. "Yes," he finally said. "When it's over, I want to see my dog, Bear." The judge frowned. "That's your final wish?" "Yes." It was recorded, final wish, meeting with the dog, Bear. They led Mark out. He walked calmly, the same way he had when entering interrogation rooms, or raids. Except back then he had a holster, a badge, a radio. Now, just handcuffs and a number on his prison jumpsuit. Behind glass, he saw Claire's mother. She stared up at the sky, exhausted, tearless, full of hate. He didn't look away. He had long stopped understanding why he even looked at the world anymore. In solitary, for the first time, he lay down not on the cot, but on the cold concrete floor. No pain, just silence and chill. Sometimes the prison doctor brought pills. Sometimes the chaplain offered confession. Mark said nothing. There was no one left to talk to. 3 days passed. On the 4th day, a guard with a grim face came. "Your dog is here." Mark sat up. "Where?" "In the yard. You've got 20 minutes. He got up without a word. They brought him to a fenced area where police dogs are normally walked. There, by the fence, sat Bear. He didn't move until Mark came close. Then the dog slowly got up, walked over, and rested his head on Mark's knees like there had never been a 2-week separation. Mark knelt down, placed his hands on that warm, familiar fur, the same he used to scratch during quiet evenings in front of the TV. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't protect her. I failed." Bear gave a soft whine, the sound he usually made when something felt wrong. Mark understood. The dog knew something. He felt it. "They were wrong, Bear. I didn't kill her." Bear lifted his head, ears up, eyes alert. And then suddenly, he bolted. He ran to the edge of the fence and froze. Something had caught his attention. A figure, a shadow, moved in the distance behind the trees. Bear growled. "Hey!" Mark shouted, but the guard was already approaching. "Time's up. Let's go." Bear didn't move. He stood by the fence watching the woods. Then, without warning, he darted off, dug under the fence and vanished into the trees. "Damn dog escaped," the guard cursed. Mark smiled for the first time in weeks. Let him go. That evening the news ran a short piece. Former detective Mark Levin sentenced to death for the murder of a young woman. Closed trial. Execution set within a month. The TV was turned off. Silence returned. But somewhere out there, deep in the forest, a dog was running. One who didn't care about politics or headlines. He knew only one thing. His master was innocent. And he would prove it. The prison routine didn't change. Every day was the same until news of Bear's escape broke the monotony. Guards laughed. "That dog will get eaten in the woods or shot by a hunter." Mark didn't argue. He said nothing. But now, he had something no one could take from him. Hope. 3 more days passed. On the 4th day, Lieutenant Colonel Grin from Internal Investigations arrived. He never shook hands, people said. so as not to leave fingerprints. You had an incident, Grin said. That dog. Got footage of how he left? Yes. Rear yard cameras caught it. Half an hour later, they were in the control room. Black and white footage played. Mark and Bear sitting together. Then the dog jumped up and ran. A second later, something flickered on the edge of the frame. A shadow. A man? Hard to tell. That's not a guard, Grin said, tapping the screen. If Levin's innocent, it'll cost us. The evidence was airtight. I know, the warden muttered. Meanwhile, Bear followed his instincts. He ran by scent, by faint markers that only he remembered. He had been in that forest before, with Claire and Mark just 3 months ago, in a bright August afternoon. He found the old campsite, trampled ground, burned stones, remains of a tent. The smell of blood and gasoline. He dug with his nose and paws. A plastic snap. A small box. He grabbed it and ran. He didn't know where, just that he had to go. Hunter Jack Pearson was driving home in his rusty pickup when a dog ran into the road. He slammed the brakes. The dog didn't attack. He walked up and dropped the plastic box at Jack's feet. What the hell? There was a camera logo on the case. Inside, a memory card. Jack tossed it in his pocket and drove home with the dog in the back. Let's see what you've got, Mutt. Hours later, he inserted the card into his laptop. A folder popped up, Night T1208. First file, shaky night footage. Someone had forgotten the camera was still recording. Then, voices. Hurry up, you idiot, you left your gloves. She's unconscious. The camera tipped. Faces, vests, a tattoo, skull with wings. Jack squinted. He knew that tattoo. He knew who it belonged to. The next morning, he went to the police station. The memory card made it into police hands. Back in his cell, Mark heard the click of the door, off schedule. He was brought to an interview room. Lieutenant Colonel Grin sat there with a laptop. We have new material, a video. He pressed play. Mark froze. He knew the man with the tattoo. Ricky Bones Dalton, the name came instantly. One of the men he once tried to put away. One of the men who had sworn revenge. This video gives me a chance, Mark said. Grin nodded. If DNA matches and the court accepts it, you'll walk free. Mark inhaled, quietly, without joy. He knew this was just the beginning. But, Grin added, we checked the bikers. Last known location, abandoned property north of the county. They left 2 weeks ago. Mark spoke quietly. They killed Claire because of me. I arrested one of their brothers years ago. Drugs, weapons. Got 20 years. You had a motive, Grin admitted. But now we have something better. Proof. Meanwhile, Bear was in a shelter. Jack Pearson had dropped him off there, thinking he'd done his part. But the dog wouldn't stay. He growled, barked, and once almost chewed through the kennel door. Staff laughed. Like he thinks he still has a job to do. They weren't wrong. The forensics database returned a match. DNA from Claire's clothes, 99.8% match to Ricky Bones Dalton and Kenny Rhodes. Mark Levin excluded. A week later, under heavy guard, Mark was moved to a federal building. Still a prisoner, but temporarily released. He watched the video again in the prosecutor's office. Faces, voices, laughter. No tears came, only cold fury. Did you arrest them? We got one, Ricky Bones Dalton. Found him near the state line. The other's on the run, but with the DNA, we'll drag him out of the dirt. What about the sentence? Supreme Court is reviewing it now. You'll return to prison temporarily, but under protection. You'll be cleared. I want Bear back. Bear sat by the shelter window, watching the road. When Mark walked in, the dog didn't bark, didn't howl. He simply stood up, like a soldier seeing his commander. Mark knelt. Bear pressed his head into his chest, and for the first time, Mark closed his eyes and felt nothing but the warmth of fur and the breath of his friend. But justice is slow and cruel. The bikers hired lawyers, claimed the evidence was fake, that jurors were biased. A scandal broke. The media exploded. Mark's name returned to the headlines, not as a killer, but as the man who was almost destroyed by the justice system. Detective accused of murder exonerated after dog uncovers crucial evidence. The headline read like a movie plot. But for Mark, it wasn't fiction. It was his life, stolen, and now painfully pieced back together. The final trial lasted 6 hours. The judge reviewed the case. The prosecutor submitted a motion to overturn the verdict. In the end, the court said just one phrase: Mark Levin is fully acquitted and released. He stepped out of the building. Bear stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps. No leash, no collar, just standing, waiting. They walked away in silence. Freedom is a strange thing. When you have it, you don't notice. When it's taken, you breathe differently. Mark realized this on his first morning of freedom, waking up in a cheap motel room to the hum of an air conditioner, not the shout of a guard. He lay on the bed in the clothes given to him at release, listening to Bear breathe softly on the floor beside him. He didn't know where to go. He had no friends left. His family had scattered across states. Those who stayed had turned their backs. His phone, provided by the police, vibrated. A message from Grin. Dalton gave up the second one. Kenny Rhodes. Extradition tomorrow. Want to be there? Mark didn't reply. He didn't want to be there. He just wanted it all to end. Still, the next day he drove to the courthouse, not to testify, just to watch. A van arrived, escorted by armed guards. Out came a man with long, greasy hair and a wrinkled jacket. Kenny Rhodes, the one laughing in the video, holding Claire by the hair. Mark stood in the shadows. No one saw him, except Kenny. Their eyes locked for a moment, and in that moment Mark saw it. Fear. Not the kind that appears in court, but the real kind. The kind that chokes you. Kenny would now live in fear, the same way Mark had. 2 weeks later, the trial of Dalton and Rhodes began. The prosecutor brought in witnesses, DNA experts, video technicians. The defense claimed the memory card was planted, but then came the damning piece. In one of the recovered videos, Dalton was recorded boasting, "Yeah, we buried that cop. Who the hell's gonna believe him now?" And then, that chick had it coming. Should have picked better company. It was enough. The court sentenced Ricky Bones Dalton and Kenny Rhodes to life in prison without parole. As the trial ended, the prosecutor gathered his files and looked at Mark. "You want to file a civil suit? For the false charges, the years lost your reputation? You'd get millions." Mark shook his head. "No, why not?" He looked at Bear sitting in the hallway chewing on an old toy. "I don't want money. I just want this to be over." Later, he was invited onto talk shows, major news networks. He refused. They asked him to speak at a criminal justice reform conference. He declined. They offered him a book deal. He said no. Instead, he got into an old car, bought with what little compensation he had accepted. He tossed a bowl, a blanket, and a backpack into the trunk. He turned to Bear. "Let's go." The house he moved into was old, creaky, and smelled like all abandoned places, of damp wood, rot, and memories. But it was clean. The previous owner, a local carpenter, had fixed the roof and stacked firewood before leaving. At parting, he said, "The silence here isn't just background noise. It's someone you'll have to live with." Mark nodded. He was used to living with things that didn't speak. He had bought the house with state compensation, took the money reluctantly, like accepting something with dirty hands. But the house, he chose instantly. It was on the edge of the state. Forests, lakes, 40 minutes to the nearest town, 10 minutes on foot to the closest neighbor. The perfect place to stop hearing other people's voices. Life felt strange at first. Every sound suspicious. Every glance in the supermarket two-pointed. Mark caught himself locking doors even in daylight, checking windows before sleep. Bear adjusted faster. It was as if the dog instantly knew the danger was over. Now it was time to live. Each morning began the same. First, silence. Then Bear's paws padding across the floor. Then Mark stepping outside, breathing in the cold morning air, watching steam rise from his cup of coffee. Bear would lie by his feet, resting his head on his paws. Sometimes Mark would hike into the forest, not to hunt, not to fish, just to walk. An axe over his shoulder, a thermos in his bag. He'd disappear for the whole day, returning with firewood, mushrooms, sometimes just stories. Working with his hands was the only thing that reminded him he was alive. The few neighbors nearby didn't pry. One, a mechanic named Eddie, offered him occasional work, fixing fences, chopping wood. Mark accepted. He didn't seek friends, but he didn't make enemies either. "Where are you from?" Eddie once asked. "Far," Mark replied. That was enough. Once a month, he went to town for food, fishing gear, books. Sometimes he browsed old newspapers, half expecting to see his name, but no one wrote about him anymore. The world had moved on. And that was good. Bear sat next to him in the car, quietly snorting when they passed bikers. He still remembered the scent, Mark could tell. But none of them posed a threat anymore. The guilty were in prison. The others were gone. One day, Grin showed up. No badge, no official car. Just an old pickup truck and a bag in hand. He greeted Mark, sat on the porch, cracked a beer. "So, this is where you ended up. Where else would I be?" Mark replied. Grin nodded. "You never reinstated your badge. Didn't want to. I'm not part of the system anymore. You were a good cop. Doesn't matter. They sat quietly for 10 minutes. Then Grin set the bag down. Here are the papers, in case you ever change your mind. And this. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge. On the back, Levin, 21st Precinct, until the end. It's not official, but you earned it. Mark took it, looked at it, closed his hand around it. Thanks, I'll be going. Good luck. They never saw each other again. Years passed. Bear aged. His muzzle turned gray. His steps grew slower. He still followed Mark into the forest but no longer chased birds. He preferred lying under a tree, watching his master split firewood or fix the roof. He lived another 4 years. One morning he simply didn't wake up. Mark buried him by the house, under a large oak tree, placed a wooden cross. No name, no dates. He just sat there until sunset, watching the sun filter through the leaves. No tears, no words. Just a soft breath, thank you. Now, he lived alone. Sometimes neighbor kids brought him food or helped carry things. He wasn't someone people feared, but not someone they ran to either, just a man. A man quietly, honestly living the life he got back after death, betrayal, and prison. One evening, as he read an old book and sipped tea, a branch tapped the window. The wind was picking up. Mark stepped onto the porch, adjusted the shutters, breathed in the cold air, and looked at the sky, and thought, now everything's in its place. He wouldn't go back to the past. He held no grudge, wanted no revenge. That was all gone. All that remained was peace, and the memory of her, of him, of the dog who once saved his life. He sat on the porch steps, lifted his face to the wind, and closed his eyes. Silence. The kind the carpenter had spoken of. The kind you could finally live with. This dog saved the man's life. If your dog was the only one who believed in your innocence, would that be enough to keep you going? Please share your honest opinions in the comments below, and thank you for listening to Storyline Narratives.